Life Unrehearsed, brought to you by Caregiver Crosswalk, Dementia Care Consulting. Never roam alone.
And good afternoon. Welcome to Life Unrehearsed. My name is Matt Delvecchio, specializing in life transitions, downsizing, and the senior living industry.
And I'm Corey Sirota, clinical social worker and psychotherapist specializing in grief and loss.
Coming right up on the first half of today's show, national television broadcasting icon Peter Mansbridge is on the line to talk about some extraordinary Canadians.
So, Matt,
Corey,
do you hear me clearly?
It sounds
Can you hear me now?
like you're not in the studio. Tell me about it.
So I am thrilled to be joining you, but I am joining you from home today because I am in yet quarantine number 2. So hopefully all is fine and well, but I am in quarantine. So here I am, here we are, but the show must go on, right, Matt?
Well, you're a trooper, and thanks for doing this from home. What do we have coming up on the second half?
Well, does everybody need to know how to find the perfect gift? Well, then this show is absolutely for you because we will be talking to entrepreneur Hilary Ludwig-Blau. She's the owner of Little Box of Treasures, and she's going to show us just how to do that. That's coming up after the 4:30 news.
Yeah, looking forward to that, Corey. All right, with all the doom and gloom of the pandemic, the days are getting shorter. It's darker so early these days. Many people are at their wits' end, and sometimes we have to step back and recognize the important things in life. And sometimes there's going to be a trigger to help you realize that there's a lot of good out there. And one of those triggers is a book that's getting a lot of attention these days called Extraordinary Canadians, Stories from the Heart of Our Nation, which was written by an extraordinary Canadian himself, Mr. Peter Mansbridge, along with esteemed journalist Mark Bulgich. Well, we have Mr. Mansbridge on the line with us. Welcome to Life Unrehearsed.
Hey, Matt. Good to talk to you.
Well, thank you for doing this. I guess this is a little role reversal for you being the interviewee.
It is a little different, that's right, but I'm getting used to it because you're right. The book has received a lot of attention of late, and that's obviously we're happy about that, but I think it's also about the subject matter. It's not about me. It's not about my buddy Mark Bulgich, who's a Montreal guy, by the way, who's the co-author of the book, but it's about these 17 people that we profile in Extraordinary Canadians, and they are quite remarkable.
They really are. We're going to be talking about a couple of them, but first, we want to talk about someone else that's had an extraordinary life, an extraordinary Canadian, yourself, and you have had a fascinating life. Born in England, family eventually made its way to Canada, and you did a stint at the Royal Canadian Navy for a couple of years in the mid-'60s, and then broadcasting. And can you tell us about those very early years in radio and TV? How did you even get into broadcasting?
Well, that's a bit of a funny story, actually. I started in radio in Churchill, Manitoba, so way up north on Hudson Bay, northern Manitoba. And I was actually working at that point for an airline. I'd come out of the Royal Canadian Navy, where I'd been taking flying training, and I ended up in an airline in northern Manitoba. And I was announcing the flight one day on the PA system, and there was somebody there who was the local radio station manager who said, "Hey, have you ever thought about being in radio?" And the next thing I knew, the following night I was working part-time at the radio station, and that's how it actually started. I'd never considered broadcasting as I was growing up. Here I was, 19, 20 years old, and suddenly working for the CBC in its Northern Service operation.
Well, it's so interesting, and I'm listening to you, and I'm like, hey, I know that voice. You definitely have this very recognizable voice and name. My understanding is you sort of hit this top job in 1988 as the chief correspondent of CBC News and the anchor of The National for almost 20 years. So I'm kind of curious about what happened. What did it feel like that first night sitting in that anchor chair, May 1st, 1988, when you were broadcasting to the nation?
Well, it was quite something. I mean, I'd been a reporter for 20 years for the CBC at that point, 20 years since that night in Churchill. So I wasn't unused to broadcasting, but I was unused to that chair. Knowlton Nash had been the anchor of the National. He'd stepped down. I'd spent a lot of time thinking about the possibilities of being in that position, and suddenly there I was in it. So the heart was pounding a little bit. There's no doubt about that. In fact, I thought anybody who was watching would have seen it pounding through my suit jacket. But one thing led to another, and I got used to it, and it was a lot of fun. I did it for 30 years, anchoring the National, and So it was quite a time.
Well, that's the voice of Peter Mansbridge here on Life Unrehearsed with Matt and Corey. Now, you have experienced it all, from major national events such as the referendums, the ice storm, all the elections, and many, many international events, Gulf War, 9/11, fall of the Berlin Wall, multiple Olympic Games, and of course, you've interviewed practically every major political figure around the world. And we're going to put you on the spot a little bit here. If you had to select one or two of the events that you covered, which ones stand out most in your mind in this illustrious career?
Well, in terms of events, probably 9/11. I mean, it was huge, and probably until this year was the biggest event of our lifetimes in terms of a major breaking news story. The pandemic, I think, overshadows that. But nevertheless, it was a big deal to be involved in that coverage. It's always a big deal when you're actually at the location of a big story that's happening. And I was in Berlin the weekend the wall came down, and you could feel the world changing in that moment. So that was pretty important too. In terms of people, and it was in some ways kind of the basis of this book. I have interviewed a lot of famous people. Big celebrities, whether they're in politics or world affairs, presidents, prime ministers, rock stars, entertainment stars, academics, religious leaders. But really, when it comes down to it, the people who I've interviewed who I felt had the most impact on me were what we call ordinary people who were caught in extraordinary circumstances, because with them there's no spin. They tell it like it is. Or was, in their case. And those have always been the people that struck me the most, and that's why I wanted to do those kind of people in this book.
Well, we're excited to talk about those people, but before that, I want to know, who are your role models? Who did you model your career after?
Well, I guess the first news anchor that had a real impact on my life was Walter Cronkite, who was the big anchor at CBS News. Had covered the Second World War, was at D-Day on the landings, was in television, obviously, when TV came along. His broadcasting on the day of the assassination of John F. Kennedy is kind of legendary in terms of what he did. Also, his news and commentary during the Vietnam War was extremely important to American society. And so it was one of the great thrills of my career when CBS asked me to do a story for their newscast, and it was, I guess, 1978. A Russian satellite had gone out of orbit and fell to Earth. It was the first one of these instances where something had fallen to Earth from space, and it landed in Canada. Now up in the Northwest Territories, and it was in a very remote region, but nevertheless it was an important story. They couldn't get anybody here to do it, so I did it, and so closing out their lead item on their newscast by saying, Peter Mansbridge for CBS News in Ottawa, where I was at that day, and then it cuts back to Walter Cronkite sitting there. So that was a big deal. I still have that tape, and it was, a big moment in my career.
Sure. It's Peter Mansbridge here on Life Unrehearsed. Just before we head out to traffic, you mentioned 17 extraordinary Canadians being interviewed for the book. How did you possibly narrow it down to 17?
That's a really good point, because there are a lot of extraordinary Canadians out there. You've probably talked to a few of them yourself on this program. But we were looking for a specific kind, people who weren't generally well known, people who represented the country as a whole. In other words, they were from different parts of the country. They represented different genders. They represented different cultures. They represented different professions. And so we were trying to get a kind of broad scope of the country. But still, we could have done 37, but sure. we ended up doing 17 for this volume. It's doing so well, they're already talking about, we should consider volume 2 at some point.
There will be never a shortage of people, I'm sure, for volume 2. Well, we need to head out to traffic here, but when we come back, we're going to hear about some of those extraordinary Canadians from your book of the same title.
Life Unrehearsed, brought to you by Lianas Senior Transition Support, specialists in downsizing and seniors residences.
And welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. Matt Del Vecchio here, along with my co-host Corey Sirota. Corey's actually in self-quarantine at home because you had to make a trip to the U.S. for a family matter, but you're being good and quarantining yourself at home and joining us from your home. And dynamic's a little different here, Corey, with you not here in the studio. Are you making it okay?
It's quieter, I'm sure. I'm good.
All right,
I'm
good.
glad to be able to be connected.
Well, we got each other here on FaceTime, so we could at least see each other. And we're honored to have on the other line Mr. Peter Mansbridge. He's here with us, and we're talking about his book called Extraordinary Canadians, Stories from the Heart of Our Nation. And really, the timing is impeccable because we need a book like this these days. And I believe you interviewed, like you mentioned, a total of 17 people, and you take us on an incredible journey crisscrossing the country to hear about some extraordinary Canadians, and we'd like to focus on two of them if we can. And such fascinating and inspiring stories, including that of Gina Cody. I particularly like this one because it has a Montreal angle to it. Can you tell us about Gina Cody?
Gina's an amazing person, and you're right, she does have a Montreal angle because her angle is Concordia University. When she came to Canada, she was actually heading towards McGill, looking for her engineering degree, which was unusual at that time, right? I mean, and still, to some degree, it's still unusual because we were used to thinking of those who go into engineering as mainly male, and, with a certain kind of reputation they have in terms of their behavior at times on campus. Anyway, she was going to go to McGill, but she ended up on the first weekend in Canada being invited to a conference at Concordia. And when she was there, the Concordia people they were very impressed. They talked her into switching at the last minute to attend Concordia instead. So she made her mark first as a student, but then she made her mark not only as somebody who was a teacher, but somebody who would influence the engineering school to the degree where she ended up becoming the first woman to have an engineering faculty named after her at a Canadian university. So she is, her story is obviously a lot more involved than that, but that gives you a hint, a sense of the kind of person we're talking about here. She is special on a lot of different, in a lot of different ways, and she shows it through her storyline in this book.
Without a doubt. I had the privilege of reading the chapter on Gina, and one of the things that struck me, well, there were so many, but the one that stood out for me was that she says that she described it as 3 chapters in her life. One was getting ready to do life's work, one was doing life's work, and now she's giving back. So I kind of wanted to put you on the spot and say, where are you?
I would hope that I'm in all of those areas too, and especially that last one, which is incredibly important to Gina, and in many ways is incredibly important to all the people who are in this book. A sense of giving back. They have all met these different challenges in their lives with courage and determination and resilience, and yet when they get to where they are at this point in their lives, and they're varying ages, but they all feel a duty in a sense to give back, to help others who may be in the similar kinds of situations that they'd faced. And I would like to think that I'm in that category too. I spend a lot of time trying to help a young journalist, but also trying to just help out people who are in need in our society. And we all know
I would
that
agree.
There's never been a time like that, the one we're facing right now.
Indeed, giving back. That's Matt and Corey here on Life Unrehearsed, and we're talking to Peter Mansbridge, author of the newly published book called Extraordinary Canadians. And just to add to Miss Cody's story, a $15 million donation to Concordia, and now the Gina Cody School of Engineering and Computer Science. It's the first university engineering faculty in Canada to be named after a woman, as you mentioned. So really, really inspiring story. And talk about inspiring story. If we can quickly get into the story of Matt Devlin. Some of you might not know the name, but you probably know the voice of the Toronto Raptors. And he had a very interesting moment during the Toronto Raptors celebration parade, didn't he?
He did, and that's what struck me. I'd never met Matt before. I knew of him because I'm a bit of a basketball fan, so obviously I knew of his part in the broadcasting of Raptors games. And in their big year last year when they won the overall championship, when there was a big parade at the end of all that, and there were literally millions of people in the streets in Toronto, they ended up at Nathan Phillips Square, which is kind of the City Hall Square in downtown Toronto. And there were probably 300,000 or 400,000 people there. And Matt was emceeing the events on stage, which was basically going to be the introduction of some major politicians like the Prime Minister and the players themselves. When all of a sudden there was a shooting taking place about not quite a block away, just at the edge of the square. And it was a serious situation. And Matt was able to kind of calm the crowd. I mean, a lot of the people in the crowd didn't hear the shooting because it was over in one corner. But if it had got out of hand in terms of a stampede of people, you can imagine we would have been dealing with a very serious situation. But the story about Matt Devlin goes back decades before that, and it kind of traces a line from his earliest beginnings in broadcasting to that moment in Nathan Phillips Square in downtown Toronto. And that's kind of the beauty of this particular profile, because I love telling stories, and I love trying to find moments that pull a thread right through a person's life story. And in Matt's case, there is one that does exactly that he was able to draw on to accomplish what he did with the crowd that day.
You know, it's amazing just listening to you, and you could imagine if something were just to go a little bit wrong and you get that stampede going on, we'd be talking a little bit of a different story.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
very much
fascinating.
So. It was as I said, I'd never met Matt before that day. I kind of saw him. Went up and introduced myself to him before the events had started, before the Raptors had arrived in that area, and we had a good little chat. And what it's like in broadcasting, you tend to think you know your fellow broadcasters, even if you've never met them, simply because you're aware of their work. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we got a chance to meet. Then this happens, and I thought about it for a couple of weeks. I thought, what would I have done? I have a certain degree of experience, but could I have handled that the same way that he did? And so that's when I decided I'm going to make him. I'd like to investigate the possibility of making him one of these people in this book. But to do that, I need to find out kind of where he came from, which was a small town in the southern states where he started working as a broadcaster, and it's a really interesting story.
Fascinating.
He's a Canadian now. He and his family all became Canadians during the Raptors' big playoff run. So it's a nice story along those elements.
Wonderful story, and I'm glad you included him in version 1 of the book. Can we say that? Well, we want to thank you very, very much, and a huge congratulations, by the way, on the success of the book. It went to number 1 on the national bestseller list in its first week, just a few weeks ago when it was published, and it's still holding strong, I see. And our second half of the show, by the way, is about holiday gift ideas. Well, Corey, how about an excellent gift idea? It is a great read. So thank you very much for taking some time on a Sunday to be with us.
Matt and Corey, thanks so much for inviting me on. I really appreciate it.
All right. That's Peter Mansbridge, broadcasting legend and author of Extraordinary Canadians. Now, Corey, I spilled the beans a little bit on the second half. What do we have coming up?
You did. You took my line. Okay, because I was going to say, buy it as a gift. Speaking of gifts, holiday season means gift giving. So how do we do that during COVID? Well, finding a perfect gift at the last minute under these conditions. Thankfully, we have Hilary Ludwig Blau. She's the owner of Little Box of Treasures, and she's going to teach us just how right after the 4:30 news.